Genuinely, if you look at the rest of his schedule, there's not another matchup that I'm excited about except this one right here. So if you drafted him, I think you can finally start him. Let's look ahead at week 3, and we are looking at running backs that you must start, or more importantly, guys that you should definitely sit. We're looking at every single team, 32 teams, 16 matchups, no time to waste. Let's start with Thursday Night Football. Not gonna lie, not the most exciting game, but Patriots at Jets, 37.5 point over under. The Jets are heavily favored, very strong favorites at home. Let's start with the Jet side of the ball there. Breece Hall, clearly a must start. We all know that by now. This team could be up and pounding the rock at the end of the game, but even if it's neutral game script, Breece Hall is averaging 7 targets per game through 2 weeks, which is absolutely nutty. Let's talk about Ramondre Stevenson. I would also label him a must start. 21 points in week 1, 17 points in week 2. But the reality is, this is a guy who has touched the ball over 25 times in each of the last 2 games. This is exactly what you wanted from Ramondre Stevenson if you drafted him. It reminds us of 2022 Ramondre, where he was just drowning in opportunities. So yes, they do face the Jets. Jets are a good defense, but they've been vulnerable on the ground. I mean, we've seen that even recently. They're 13th in points allowed so far in 2024. All right, let's go to the Sunday 1 p.m. slate of games. Giants at Browns, 38.5 point over under. And again, the Browns are heavily favored at home. Let's start with the Brown side of the ball. Like, to be honest with you guys, this backfield just got a lot more difficult to project after week 2. And week 1, Jerome Ford played 75% of the snaps. He had 19 total opportunities. And then in week 2, Jerome Ford's snap percentage drastically drops all the way down to 44%. He only has 9 total opportunities. And Deonta Foreman, his opportunities completely out of nowhere just skyrocket to 15 touches. He out-touches Jerome Ford. So this backfield is extremely confusing. Personally, I don't think you should start either of these names, but in a game where the Browns are probably up, I guess you could go ahead and throw Jerome Ford out there if you're desperate. I do not want to touch this backfield. And as far as the Giants go, Devin Singletary is a spot start, my RB31 of the week. I really don't like this matchup. I don't think the Giants are going to be up. Vegas agrees. I don't see Devin Singletary having a ton of value. And now that Tyrone Tracy is getting work on the goal line, how much can you really rely on Devin Singletary? I mean, Tyrone Tracy is the bigger back, so it makes sense for them to give him opportunities there. But if that's going to be a trend to continue, I just don't think Devin Singletary is a safe play. All right, the third matchup we're going to look at is the Bears at the Colts, 42.5 point over under. The Colts are favored at home, which is honestly crazy. Did Vegas watch Anthony Richardson play football in week 2? Maybe not. Okay, we'll move on. But this is tied for the closest spread of the week. So game script wise, both teams should be in this game theoretically. Let's start with the Colts side of the ball. Shane Steichen, what the hell are you doing, man? In week 1, Jonathan Taylor, 96% of the snaps barely came off the field. In week 2, Jonathan Taylor, 52% of the snaps. And Shane Steichen, after the game, has the audacity to tell you that they needed a running back to catch passes, as if Jonathan Taylor isn't also your best pass-catching running back that you have on your team. Don't understand what the hell Shane Steichen is talking about, but regardless, we are going to label Jonathan Taylor a must-start. Over 100 yards on the ground last week versus Green Bay. They should have given the ball more. Maybe they will learn their lesson and do that here in week 3. But with the Bears, I don't see a clear start. Look, you can start DeAndre Swift, but this guy is averaging around 6.5 points per game through 2 weeks. He is extremely inefficient on the ground. Last week, he had 14 attempts versus Houston, averaged 1.3 yards per attempt. Not a guy we were targeting before the year, but he is still going to be the volume share option. It's definitely got to be annoying for Swift owners that Khalil Herbert came in, only played 9% of the snaps, and still got the goal line touchdown. I don't know, guys. You can play him if you're in a desperate spot, but I would say 90% of people have a better play than DeAndre Swift this week. All right, the fourth matchup we're going to look at is the Texans at the Vikings. 46.5 point over under. The Texans are favored, and they're not at home. Let's start with Joe Mixon. At the time of recording this, I do not have the ability to tell you if he will play or not. They are calling him day to day with the ankle injury. At the time of recording this, he is scheduled to undergo an MRI. I don't know the results of that as of today. Now, they are saying he's day to day. If he plays, he's an absolute must start. My RB8 on the week. It is a tough matchup versus the Vikings, but you don't sit Joe Mixon. Now, What you all want to know is if Joe Mixon doesn't play, if he sits, what would that mean for Cam Akers? That means Cam Akers would be my RB27. Again, if Mixon is out, my RB27 and absolutely a startable name here in week 3. He got some work last week when Joe Mixon went down. He averaged over 4.5 yards per carry. He got a target through the air. So on a really good offense, Cam Akers is totally a playable name. And Dameon Pierce, look, here's the deal with Dameon Pierce. He had a hamstring that popped up on Thursday and he was limited in practice. Then on Friday of last week, he was a did not participant. He didn't practice. That is not a good sign for week 3. I'm going to go ahead and project that he doesn't play in this game, which means Cam Akers is a fine play. Let's talk about the Vikings here. I would label Aaron Jones a must start. Not a good matchup. I'll be honest with you. The Texans defense looks legit. Remember, they held DeAndre Swift to 1.4 yards per attempt or something last week. But Aaron Jones gets work through the air. He gets worked on the ground. 6 targets last week. So he has a safe floor, even if he doesn't go off, let's say. But certainly if this team is going to be down and coming from behind versus the Texans, Aaron Jones is going to get plenty of work in the air. And it is a little bit concerning to see Ty Chandler getting more and more work, but you have to put Aaron Jones out there if you have no clear better option. All right, the 5th matchup we'll look at is the Eagles at the Saints. Eagles are favored. This is tied for the 2nd highest over-under of the week. The Saints are coming out hot. They are on fire. My guy for 2024, Alvin Kamara, is lighting the league on fire. The RB1 through 2 weeks. Of course, you're going to start him. And of course, you're going to start Saquon Barkley. I don't think this matchup we really need to think too heavily on. Okay, the 6th matchup we're going to look at is the Chargers at the Steelers. 36.5 point over under. This is one of the lowest over unders of the week. The Steelers are favored. This is tied for the closest spread of the week. So even though the projected total points are low, it should be a competitive game on both sides. J.K. Dobbins, there isn't a more efficient running back than J.K. Dobbins through the first 2 weeks. Now, you have to admit that he's had a cupcake matchup so far. The Raiders in week 1, the Panthers in week 2. That might be the best matchup through 2 weeks for any running back thus far. So we definitely need to limit our expectations for J.K. Dobbins in this game. The Steelers are 26th in points allowed to running backs, but still, based off what you've seen for Dobbins so far, based off that offensive line play in Los Angeles, I think you can start J.K. Dobbins. Gus Edwards just doesn't interest me. 18 touches last week on the ground, no targets, and he only had 5.9 PPR points. I just don't know where the upside is. Dobbins, at least he gets some work through the air, whereas with Gus Edwards, he would have to get a touchdown to pay off playing him. Now, with the Steelers, I would say 85% of people have a better option than Najee Harris. Guys, this offense with Justin Fields is, working. It's functioning as it should. But for fantasy, there's just very little interest. Think about it. Justin Fields, when he's in trouble, he is a very athletic, fast quarterback. He should get out in the open field and use his legs. That means guys like Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren probably don't have the targets that you want from them. I mean, Najee Harris in week 1, 22 touches. Najee Harris in week 2, 19 touches. Neither of those weeks did he score over 9 PPR points. Just not a viable option at this point. Again, 85% of people have a better name than one of these 2 running backs. The 7th matchup we will look at is the Broncos at the Bucs. 39.5 point over under, and the Bucs are heavily favored. Who out there has Rachaad White? I know you want me to talk about him. I do think this is a bounce back week for Rachaad White. The Broncos through 2 weeks are 11th in points allowed to running backs, so it's a top 12 matchup. The good news for Rachaad White, 70% of snaps played in week 1, 16.5 PPR points. In week 2, 71% of the snaps played. So the percentage of snaps played went up, but he just didn't get targets through the air and he wasn't very efficient on the ground. This is the matchup for him to bounce back on. They should be up big. They should be able to establish the run. This is a chance for Rachaad White to really establish himself. Or if he underperforms, it is definitely time to push the alarm bells. As far as the Broncos side of the ball, for Javonte Williams, it's definitely good to see that his snap percentage skyrockets up from week 1 to week 2. His touches skyrockets up from week 1 to week 2. He had 16 total opportunities versus the Steelers, over 11.5 PPR points. And if he is going to get more opportunities through the air consistently, he could be a reliable floor name. But when you have Bo Nix leading your offense, I mean, how excited can we really be? Here's what I will say. If you have to throw Javonte Williams into your lineups this week, just know that this might be a very good matchup for the Broncos because Vita Vea is likely going to miss time. Their monster defensive tackle that kind of anchors their rush defense. he's probably going to miss time, so at least Javonte will have a real opportunity. And it's good to see that Jaleel McLaughlin was pretty much irrelevant in week 2. Okay, let's talk about the Packers at the Titans. Last week, the Packers get a win versus the Colts, and Josh Jacobs has 32 rushing attempts. Josh Jacobs had 32 rushing attempts. Of course, you don't sit him. The offense is not going to be fun to watch, but you cannot sit a guy who might touch the ball 30 plus times. Now, as far as Marshawn Lloyd, he's dealing with an ankle injury. Emmanuel Wilson, these guys are really not threats to touches. Now, as far as the Titans go, great news if you own Tony Pollard. That news is Tajay Spears is dealing with an injury, so Tony Pollard, who is already dominating volume, might see even more opportunities. 67% of the snaps played in week number 2 and 23 total opportunities. I mean, the RB11 on the season so far, he looks great. He looks so good coming off that injury now a full year, so you can definitely start him. And in this matchup, we have 2 teams that are a top 10 matchup for your fantasy running back through 2 weeks. All right, at number 9, this is the start of the later slate of games. There's a huge slate of games in the afternoon, which is great. I hated last week how there was only 3. Let me know if you guys are with me there. But let's start with the Panthers at the Raiders. So, breaking news, Bryce Young has been benched for Andy Dalton. I do think that's good for the Carolina Panthers. That could be good for Chuba Hubbard. But at the moment, I just don't see how you put this guy into your lineup. I mean, he is still splitting snaps with Miles Sanders. And as far as the Raiders go, if you are ever going to start Zamir White, guys, this is the week to start Zamir White. Genuinely, if you look at the rest of his schedule, there's not another matchup that I'm excited about except this one right here. So if you drafted him, I think you can finally start him. He's my RB26. Remember last week I said do not start him versus Baltimore. This week we are changing our tune simply because the matchup is so juicy. The Panthers are the second best matchup for your fantasy running back right now in 2024. And the good news for Zamir White is in week 1, he wasn't getting any work in the air, and Alexander Mattison was getting a good portion of the snaps. In week 2, Zamir jumps in snap percentages all the way up to 63%. He had 13 total touches, and 4 of those were targets. They're using him on third downs. They're using him in the air. Can they just give him the damn goal line touch? Why are you giving the touchdown to Alexander Mattison? Oh my gosh, don't get me started. But look, I think this is the only week that you can actually start him. So I think he's a legit flex play or RB2 play here in week number 3. All right, the 10th matchup we will look at is the Dolphins at the Seahawks. No Tua tags this week, most likely. So this will be interesting. A lot of people are going to be asking, do I still start Devon Achane? Absolutely. You definitely still start Devon Achane, okay? Devon Achane has 7 targets in back-to-back games. In PPR or half PPR leagues, he is bust-proof. It doesn't matter what quarterback is going to be back there. They're going to dump the ball off to Devon Achane. And here's what's funny. McDaniels this week, they said, are you worried about how much workload Devon Achane is getting? Does that concern you? And McDaniels replied and said, I think we could give him even more work. So if you are a Devon Achane owner out there, you got to be feeling absolutely on top of the world. Definition of a league winner right now. Drowning in carries, drowning in targets. The matchup is middle of the pack versus Seahawks, but I definitely think Achane is a absolute smash start. And I don't think you can start any other running back in that backfield for now. It looks like they're going to give him all the work. Now, as far as the Seahawks side of the ball goes, this is a very good matchup against the Dolphins, who are giving up the 6th most points to fantasy running backs through 2 weeks. I ranked this running back room as if both of these guys are starting. Let me explain. Kenneth Walker is my RB13 if he plays. One of my starts of the week. Zach Charbonnet is my RB25 if Kenneth Walker cannot play because of that oblique injury, okay? So if Charbonnet is your starter, you playing with confidence. If Charbonnet is not your starter, you start Ken Walker with confidence. And last thing I'll say is if Ken Walker plays, Zach Charbonnet becomes my RB40 in my rankings. Not someone that you can even think about starting in this one. All right, the 11th matchup we'll look at is the Lions at the Cardinals. 52.5 point over under. So Vegas is telling us there should be a lot of fantasy cheese from this matchup. This is the most points projected in week number 3. And it's 2 offenses that are looking pretty good through 2 weeks. I know the Lions are struggling a little bit, but clearly you're starting Jahmyr Gibbs. clearly you're starting David Montgomery. Jahmyr Gibbs is the RB9 on the year so far. David Montgomery is the RB12 on the year so far. Two running backs in the same backfield, top 12 plays. And as far as the Cardinals go, I actually really love James Conner this week. Detroit's rush defense is very, very difficult. But with James Conner, he's getting work on the ground. He's getting work on the air. So I feel like he's almost matchup proof. The RB7 through 2 weeks, you're definitely going to put this guy out there. All right, the 12th matchup we will look at is the Ravens at the Cowboys. This is a 49.5 point over under. The Ravens are favored, which is crazy. What is FanDuel thinking here? I mean, it's a home Cowboys game. I didn't expect that to be the case. This is tied for the second highest over under of the week. So we should see a lot of fantasy points. And this is also tied for the closest spread of the week, meaning this should be a competitive game on both sides. Ideally, this is not a blowout on either side of the ball. Let's start with the Ravens. The Cowboys, guys, are the best matchup for your fantasy running back through 2 weeks. We obviously saw what Alvin Kamara did last week, but right now the Cowboys are bleeding fantasy points on the ground. It definitely looks like they are missing Dan Quinn over in Washington. Derrick Henry is a must start. My RB11 on the week. You definitely got to play him. Was really weird the way they used him in the first half, but in the second half, they finally started using Derrick Henry, in pitches and tosses, trying to get him in space. I think they'll try and emulate that moving forward. As far as the Cowboys go, I just don't know how you're starting either of these names. It's like a true split backfield. Zeke got the goal line touchdown in week 1, but in week 2, neither of them had work. Neither of them scored over 10 points. It's kind of disgusting. If neither of these guys get into the end zone, I don't know why you would be happy to play them. And I don't know how you can project that in a very difficult matchup versus the Baltimore Ravens, who are 25th in points allowed to running backs. All right, the 13th matchup we will look at here is the 49ers at the Rams, 43.5 point over under. And the Niners are heavily favored in this one, guys. Even though it's a home Rams game, you got to think about it. The Rams offense is just not going to be as good as we wanted it to be because Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are both out of this game. The offensive line is struggling, but we're still going to label Kyren Williams a must start. He had 15 touches last week. The week before that, 21 touches. It's a volume play at this point. You have to hope that he gets targets. You have to hope that he gets into the end zone. They use him in the end zone, but I am a little bit concerned that Kyren Williams, his lack of efficiency could lead to a bigger role for Blake Corum. That is definitely something to monitor. Now, as far as the 49ers go, Jordan Mason is one of the best starts in fantasy this week. Last week, we were begging you guys, please start Jordan Mason. Please start Jordan Mason. Jordan Mason is the RB6 through 2 weeks. He averaged over 5 yards per carry versus the Vikings, over 5 yards per carry against the Jets, and now he gets to face the Rams, who are 4th in points allowed through 2 weeks to your fantasy running back. It's a no-brainer. He's a top 6 locked and load starter almost every single week. Let's go to Sunday Night Football now. The Chiefs at the Falcons, 46.5 point over under. The Chiefs are obviously favored because they're the Chiefs. We know that. But let's talk about this Chiefs running back room. Now, first off, the matchup isn't great. Okay, the Falcons are 27th in points allowed to running backs. They are a difficult matchup. There is no way around it. We have to recognize that. Now, I am going to label Carson Steele a spot start. Let me explain. Ideally, you do not play Carson Steele. Ideally, you don't play any running back in Kansas City this week. If you have better options, please lean that way. But once you're in the late 20s of your weekly rankings at the running back position, all I am looking for is upside. And I do see Carson Steele as an upside type of play. Let's talk about this. There'll be a lot of debates throughout this entire week between Carson Steele, Samaje Perine. I know people are talking about Kareem Hunt. Quite frankly, even if they sign him, I don't think he's going to be a serious contributor. He was one of the least efficient running backs in the entire NFL last year. I will actually give my editor a screenshot so you can look at this. Bottom 3 of pretty much every efficiency metric that you could name. So anyway, I guess you just have to make a gut call here. And my gut call is that Carson Steele will probably be the name to own, but I also want Perine if, talking about waivers. But Samaje, guys, here's the deal. Samaje Perine played just 4 snaps in the first 58 minutes of last week's game. Then he played 5 more snaps when Pacheco went out of the game with that injury. But you can see that Carson Steele had early down work, he had goal line work, he had short yardage work, and he had an actual role in this offense even before Isaiah Pacheco went down. So if I were to project based off of usage, I do feel like Carson Steele is the guy to play. I get it. He's not the most special athlete. He's a little bit of a fullback type of build, but that could be something that these guys are interested in. Maybe they just want to pound, the ball 15 times a game with a guy who is a little bit difficult for the defense to tackle. So I would lean Carson Steele. Like I said, 90% of you guys will have a better option. You should not start this guy, but I'm specifically talking right now to deeper formats where you kind of every week are making a tough decision. Now with the Falcons, of course, you're starting Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson hasn't scored a touchdown yet in the NFL this year, but he's averaging over 16 points per game in PPR, which is absolutely nutty. All right, the 15th matchup. This is the start of our Monday Night Football doubleheader. I don't know who this video has to go to. I am begging you, NFL. No one is asking for this. No one is asking for you to do this. Please stop. Listen to your audience. We don't want 2 games on Monday Night Football. Am I the only one who feels this way? I don't feel like I've ever heard anyone request at any point the NFL do this. It's annoying. It's not fun. Stop doing it, okay? But the first doubleheader is Jags at Bills, 46.5 point over under. For the Jags side of the ball, Travis Etienne is a must start. Tank Bigsby did injure himself on one of the first plays in week 2. I don't believe Tank Bigsby will play, so Travis Etienne should feast on opportunities. He played 72% of the snaps in week number 2, and he had 17 total touches, so you're definitely going to put him out there. Versus the Buffalo Bills team, by the way, that's 3rd in points allowed to running backs, so far they've been a pretty good matchup. And as far as James Cook, do you really need me to tell you to start James Cook after he scored 3 touchdowns last week? I mean, you guys know that, okay? Let's move on to the last game of the week, which is Commanders at Bengals. 48.5 point over under. The Bengals are heavy favorites. And when I say heavy, I mean the Bengals are the heaviest favorites of the week in any matchup, point blank, period. The Bengals are projected to score over 30 points in this game when you look at the spread. So let's start with Zach Moss. Zach Moss is absolutely a start of the week for me. Couldn't be more excited to play him this week versus the Commanders. Probably the worst defense in the entire NFL. You can absolutely put him in there. He's my RB22 as I sit here today. And then Brian Robinson is another name that I feel totally comfortable to start. Last week versus the Giants, 133 total yards. He had over 17 points in week 1, over 14 points in week 2. He's just a really good floor play at this point. RB14 overall through 2 weeks. Austin Eckler is actually looking really good. He's been very efficient on the ground. He's been great through the air. So I want to watch that space. But right now, that backfield is really good for Jaden Daniels. I just don't think Eckler is viable for fantasy football. So those are all the matchups for this week. How did I do, guys? Do you agree? Do you disagree with some of the takes? Let me know in the comments below. I appreciate you guys, of course, for our latest thoughts as injuries and news comes out. Stay tuned to our live streams where we do Q&As. Last thing I'll say is if you are having a difficult time making a start decision this week, check out the pinned comment. There is a link that you can submit a question to us and ask us a trade question, start, sit, team review, anything through that link at any time, and we can help you throughout the week. I appreciate you for watching. Do me a favor, drop a like, subscribe if you like the content, and I'll see you very soon. And by the way, wide receiver start sits will be out later in the day, so be on the lookout for a double release from us here at Fantasyland. I appreciate you guys. Go get the win in week 3. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.